I want to talk about the European exploration and settlement. So, when did the Europeans decide that they wanted to explore um, and reach this new world? Did they know there was a massive continent on the other side of the ocean? What were their intentions when they set out on this this mission, this adventure?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the Europeans were first trying to reach the spices of the East. It's a cliche, but it's true. And the Portuguese were trying to do this by sailing around Africa. And they really thought when they got to the bight of Africa there, just south of the Sahara by Ghana, they thought, man, this is going to lead to the Indian Ocean. And then they realized that it actually went a lot further south. But they had already reached halfway down the west coast of Africa by 1450. They had also found a bunch of islands out in the Atlantic. So, like the Canary Islands, even the Azores Islands, they had found those well before Columbus. So they knew that there was land out there. So um, it was only a matter of time for somebody to start sailing west because they actually knew the world was round back then. And so Columbus had been pitching this idea for, I think, 10 years before he got approval. And then, of course, he was hoping he had landed at China, and Columbus died, I think, still trying to maintain that he had discovered Asia. So nobody knew that whole new world was there halfway between Europe and Asia. But the Spanish ended up being able to colonize it relatively quickly. That's a very interesting story, of course, in and of itself.
Huh. Okay, so let's talk about this guy, Christopher Columbus. We sort of know him as the guy who sailed across the ocean blue in 1492, found the New World. But who was Christopher Columbus? Where did he come from?
Yeah, so right, he's a Genoese. He's mostly interested in trading. He wants to set up trading posts. This is what the Portuguese did in West Africa and later in the Indian Ocean. They did not conquer, they didn't have the technology until the 19th century to conquer Africa or Asia. It had too many people, and there was only ever a couple hundred Europeans. They might have had guns, but they could always be outnumbered. And so they set up trading posts on the coasts, and this enriched the Portuguese a whole lot by bringing all these Eastern spices and gold, and then slaves that were offered to them by native chiefs in some places. That's where they got most of them. They didn't capture the slaves, they didn't have the power to do that. So, this is the model that Columbus had when he was going to sail west to China. He wanted to be the new Marco Polo. He wanted to set up a trading fort, just like the Portuguese were going to do, like at Macau in China. And so he was hoping to get a kind of Spanish trading port and get a monopoly on Chinese spices and stuff. So when he got to the Caribbean, he was kind of dismayed to find that everybody was very, very poor. This is one of the reasons why he was really hoping that they would have some gold, and there were a few gold earrings and stuff. And he was asking them where the source of the gold was because he was hoping, all right, if these guys are that poor, hopefully I can get something to trade them with or with them.
Yeah, the gold. We see Cortez, who really finds the gold with the Aztecs, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there wasn't an extreme amount of gold. It turns out there was mostly silver. So the Aztecs had gathered up a lot of the gold in central Mexico that was available. Of course, there was later going to be gold in places like California, but there wasn't a super lot in Mexico. The Aztecs had gathered it. And yeah, Cortez managed to carry that off. And that's one of the strangest what ifs in history. Cortez should not have been able to beat the Aztecs. He beat them by 1519. Columbus, was there by 1492. They had permanent settlements in the Caribbean islands just after 1500. And yet here's Cortez conquering the Aztecs by 1519. He did this by getting many thousand native allies to work with him, and these were people who hated the Aztecs. If he had not had tens of thousands of native allies, his couple of hundred men never could have conquered the Aztecs.
I think it was his mentality because one of the coolest quotes in the history of mankind was from Cortez. And when he arrived to the New World, to Central America, he said, "Burn the boats. Let's not give ourselves a way out. We're going to conquer and we're going to win, or we die." And I think that is extremely cool. But anyway, back to
Agreed.
Columbus. Back to Columbus. So he sails across the Atlantic, arrives in the Caribbean. What does he find when he arrives, and what's his reaction?
Right. So he finds a number of different islands. They think he first landed in the Bahamas, then he ends up on Santo Domingo. And yeah, his reaction was actually disappointment. He said, "All right, these people do not have roofs of gold. They're not wearing fine Chinese silks. What's going on here? I must have found an outlying island." And he said, "Hey, point me to China." And they kept pointing him to the southeast, which of course is not really the right direction to find a major civilization from Cuba. And so, yeah, so Columbus was disappointed, but he was a consummate salesman. Again, he was intrepid. He was entrepreneurial. He made things happen even when they didn't work out for him. So we went back and maybe gaslit the king and queen a little bit and said, "Hey, this is a really rich land. It's is the size of Great Britain, this island Cuba that I found, and so let's set up a colony here." And so yeah, the king and queen agreed to do that. And he said, "Hey, you granted me title admiral of the ocean sea. I also want to be lord of this new colony," and they let him be governor. And he really wanted to be a feudal lord. He wanted to do what his in-laws had done. I think his father-in-law had been the lord of an island, kind of like an estate. They were thinking just like Spanish feudalism. It was the late Middle Ages, you know. So he wanted the natives to work for him as peasants, but not as slaves, but to be workers just like Spanish peasants were. And that's really what he was hoping for. Of course, what they didn't bank on is that the natives, because they were isolated from the rest of the world, were very susceptible to European diseases. Asia, Africa, and Europe all shared the same disease pool. So Africans and Asians were immune to the same diseases as Europeans. So when Europeans went to Africa and Asia, nobody died off from their diseases. But when they went to the New World, within a generation, something like 90% of the people in the area had died off. The Columbus and his pals never thought that was going to happen. They were expecting the natives to be numerous forever, just like the African and North African natives continue to be.
Yeah, we'll get to the issue of disease in a minute here, but you touched on one of the big sort of misinterpretations of Columbus that you debunked in the book. And when he arrives to the New World, he writes in his diaries that these people they will make good servants or good slaves or good subjects, whatever uh, language interpretation is plugged in there. And a lot of people interpret this as these people will make good slaves, and he was a racist. But you debunk this in the book, so can you sort of speak to that idea?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he does say good servants, and what he means is servants of the crown, because he's writing to the king and queen of Spain, and he's saying they will be good fellow citizens. So when he says servants, he actually means what we would interpret as citizens. And so the idea is they will be good subjects of the crown. They're just as intelligent, just as skillful as any European. If we teach them to do, for example, metalcraft, we can expect they're going to create just as good a things as Spanish blacksmiths do. So Columbus was full of optimism that these people were every bit as clever and capable as Europeans. He wasn't racist in any modern sense of the term. They actually thought that everyone at every latitude was the same color. And even if they looked darker, it was just because they were out in the sun more. And so they didn't even have a concept of race. They also believed everyone was descended from Adam and Eve. So Columbus's attitude was these are all human brothers and sisters. And that's mostly what he was thinking when he was talking about these people from the New World.
Yeah, that's such an important point that was sort of revelationary to me, but I do want to touch on that later. The idea of culturalism versus racism, and this idea of the skin color that you just touched on. But
Sure.
you use an important word, optimistic. So when they saw the natives for the first time, it seems to me that they were sort of impressed. These people were very physically fit, healthy looking, um, and also smart. Columbus kind of viewed these people as intelligent in the way that they would learn quickly how to, like you said, metalwork, adopt advanced European technologies very quickly. So, how were the natives treated by once they started sort of integrating and settling um, in the new world? How were they treated? Because a lot of people think they were just mass murdered, enslaved, etc.
Yeah, well, it ended up becoming a delicate political situation, just like anywhere else. So, I mean, anytime two native tribes came together, so you get like the Apache and the Navajo in the 1860s, there's going to be tension. It was the same thing between these Spanish adventurers, right? So, I mean, sometimes they would marry into a native house and they would have lots of kids and they would live happily ever after in the native tribal area. Other guys would be jerks and they would steal stuff from natives. Sometimes the natives would steal animals from the Spaniards, and then tensions would flare. And it was the Middle Ages. People would start punching each other. They might draw weapons. So within a couple of years, the Spanish and various native tribes were already up in arms with each other, despite the fact that there were many people who wanted to see them just get along and trade well. And so basically, it was the whole spectrum from intermarrying and creating alliances to warfare and problems. And after Columbus was replaced, there were new governors who tried various attacks with the native leaders. But the fact is, many of them were dying off so fast from disease, and many others were just leaving the area altogether, that there weren't that many natives left by 1520, say.